We're going to take a look at a few of the basic settings in the develop module today. So I'm going to pick an image. Let's see, I will take this image here, and then we'll go into the develop module, and you'll see that it changes my layout just a little bit. Over here on the left, we still have the navigator with our zoom levels up here at the top that we can look at. We have some presets that are here, which I tend to kind of shy away from because I don't want everything to look the same, but the same as what everyone else does. But if I had some settings that I always applied to images, then I could create a user preset and I could use my own preset to kind of start my image off. We have snapshots, which we'll talk about in the future. We have histories, which shows everything that's been done to this image at any point while it's been in this catalog. And then we have our collections down here. We have the ability to copy and paste our develop settings. Along the bottom, we still have our film strip where we can choose what images we want to work on. We also still have our filters over here. We have a few different views that we can use. The loop view is the default that shows up. We have a reference and an active view, which will let us drop an image into here that's our reference image so that we can work on our other image and try to get it to match better. We have a before and after view, which will leave an undone image here, and then the after, which will show us everything that we've done. But we're going to go back into the loop view for right now and kind of look at a few of these settings. So the settings are all over here on the right, and we have our histogram, which you may notice is a little bit more interactive now. There's areas that highlight as I roll over it. And we're going to show you can see them flashing down here as I do it, and you can see them flashing up on the histogram as I roll over the sliders as well. So exposure is really going to work that center section of the histogram. Highlights works just to the right of the center section. Shadows works just to the left. Whites is the extreme far right, and blacks would be the far left on the histogram. And so we can kind of make our moves with that. So let's talk about what we want to do here. So we're going to really work in this tone section today, and I'm just going to kind of show you the tones and the luminosity of our image. So we have our exposure slider here, and it works in stops. So you can kind of slide it, and it'll either decrease the exposure as you slide to the left or increase the exposure as you slide to the right. And you may notice up there that my histogram adjusts as I go. So it's a dynamic histogram that's going to keep adjusting. If you want to reset your slider at any point, you can double click on the word and it'll put it right back in the center. So we can move the exposure. We can say, well, the shadows look a little dark, so I'm going to move the exposure. But you can see that that affects the highlights as well. And so I really don't want to make one big exposure move. What I want to do is work on the contrast of the image, right? I want to, maybe make the highlights a little bit brighter and the shadows a lot lighter. Or maybe make the highlights a little bit darker and the shadows a lot brighter. And so I'm going to try to adjust my contrast. And you see if I slide to the left, it's going to decrease my contrast, which is going to open up the shadows. Remember, contrast is the difference between the lights and the darks in the image. I'm going to reset it and look at the histogram. My image has a lot of contrast. There's a lot of darks. There's a lot of brights. There's not a lot in the middle. As I slide my slider, you can see it kind of pulls those tones in towards the middle. If I slide it the other direction, it's going to exaggerate the contrast and really push those tones out towards the edges. And you can see that it definitely has exaggerated my contrast. So as I slide this and look at it, I don't like what it's doing. I don't like that sort of overall move. So I'm going to reset my contrast, and I'm going to come down and look at these 4 settings down here. So I have highlights, and that's going to deal with that section of my histogram right here. That's sort of not quite to the extreme right. And so if I slide that to the negative side, it's going to put more information into those highlights, but kind of leave my super brights, the whites and the very edges of the image alone. And so you can see I can kind of bring those down, and it's really adjusting my histogram as I go. And then I have my shadows, which is this section of the histogram. And I'm going to show you a little bit of a different way to make that slider move. I'm going to grab right up here on my histogram, and I'm just going to slide that to the right. So I'm just clicking and holding and sliding to the right. And you'll notice down below that my shadows slider is actually moving to the right as well. So I can just grab a section of my histogram and I can slide it around and make the adjustments. And what's great about Lightroom is that it makes those adjustments down here on my sliders. And if we look over here on the left, it is keeping track of everything that I do, and I can go back to any stage of any adjustment that I've made. So I'm kind of liking this a little bit better. The shadows are opening up a bit. The highlights have held their detail. We still have nice tone in the midtones. I think this is looking pretty good. Let's look at the whites and the blacks really quick. This is going to deal with the extremes on the very edges of my histogram. And so if I slide this to the right, you can see it's going to brighten up those highlights, which even though we're working on the extremes, is going to pull some of the other parts of the image in. Just as a real quick aside, or a keyboard shortcut note, if you hold down the Option key when you slide, it'll show you what parts of your image will turn pure white. See, as I slide it over more of my image becomes pure white. And as I slide it to the left, more of those little white pixels disappear and less of my image has white. It's totally normal for your image to have some area that's pure white. There are really bright highlights shining off of some of these cars, maybe off of a street light or two. So you can see when I hold down the Option key and move, some of those little highlights show up. The sign on the window here, I think that's some sort of metallic texture that's on there. And so that's really reflecting the light back. And so that gets pure white. So I can choose by holding down the Option key how much of my pure whites show up in my image and make the decision of whether that's acceptable or not. And then I can do the same thing with the blacks. I'm going to show you the blacks before I hold down the Option key. If I slide to the left, it makes the very darks darker and kind of pulls some of the other tones in as well. And if I slide to the right, it makes them lighter. Now, you can see as I slide it to the right, we now have no black. Look at my histogram. There aren't any pixels on black, and the image looks a little bit flat. It just doesn't have much life to it. If I hold down Option, you can see as I slide to the left, it actually is taking me a little bit before something starts to show up as pure black. And I usually like to add just a little bit. So those dark shadows underneath there, that's fine to be pure black. And now that I've adjusted the blacks in the image and the whites in the image, I will go revisit. Maybe now a little bit of overall exposure might help the image. And then I might have to bring my highlights down just a little bit. And I might even open my shadows up a little bit more. And then come back down and double check that I still have some nice, deep, rich, shadowy blacks in there. So you can see, I'll show you the before and after. Here's the before of the image, and here's the after of the image. A dramatic change to the image. We've brought a lot of detail up into the shadows. We've held and even brought more detail back into the highlights. And so you can see, you can kind of keep going around and adjusting these things out to get it to look just the way you want it to look. You can go through some different views of the before and after. As I click on it, it sort of cycles through the different ways of looking at it. If I go back to my loop mode, there's a key just above the return key, which is called the /. And if we click on that, it'll toggle me between my before and after. And you can see right up here in the corner, it says before when it's in the before image, and then it clicks off to show the after image. So those are the basic settings in the develop module. One thing that I'll say for sure on this is to use these with a light touch if possible, right? I've made some pretty extreme moves. And as I sit and look at this image, I'm thinking I could even sort of maybe close those shadows up just a little bit. Perhaps my move was a little extreme. Sometimes I like to kind of make my moves on my image and then go to another image and then come back and sort of revisit it and see if I still like the adjustments that I made on it. So we're going to start with those moves, the luminosity moves in the develop module. And as we go through more demos, I'll show you more things about the develop module.